normally I tell amusing stories, but this is a true personal story, and it may be why I tell amusing stories. It was 1960, and I was 12 years old, and I was having great trouble dealing with my mother's colon cancer. There had been a steady 2-year decline, a slow decline, and she had been a beautiful woman, and now she was in bed. She'd been in and out of hospitals, in and out of consciousness, and the radiation treatments had burned a hole in her back at the base of her spine. She would never walk again. And she was in a hospital bed in our living room. And this was our house, the house that my father had built. He worked in a mill. He was a factory worker, but he was also a carpenter. And he had built this house for her when they were newlyweds in the 1930s. Now, they lived there a long time before they had children. And I was 12 years old, and what was happening was I couldn't understand it. I couldn't fathom why a good person, beautiful person like my mother was in such pain and suffering. And I had an afternoon paper route, and I used to go out on this paper route in the afternoon. I'd worry about it. I wanted to laugh, and I wanted to cry, and I wanted to play again. I wanted things to be normal, and I was really tired of people telling me, it's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. It's not going to be all right. I knew it wasn't going to be all right. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I was tired of people treating me like I might break, and I didn't know what to do. And on this one day when I went out on my paper route, it was about a mile from my house by the time I finished, and I walked along. And as I delivered my last paper, some of my buddies were up on the street corner, and they were hanging out and they were laughing, and they had a tennis ball. And they were daring each other to throw the ball at passing cars, but nobody had thrown it yet. And I walk up, and they all get quiet. How you doing? Are you all right? Are you fine? I'm damn fine. I'm all right. Listen, you guys, something wrong with you guys. You're afraid to throw that ball, aren't you? You're chickens. Let me have that ball. And I grabbed the ball and I flung it as hard as I could. And it went out in the road, and there was a shiny green Buick driving by. It hit the hood of that thing and boom, and bounced into the windshield. It was a tennis ball, so it didn't break the glass, but the woman who was driving slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched. My buddies took off, and I was standing there by myself looking at her, and she got out of the car and she glared at me. Do you know what you did? My son is in the front seat. His head hit the dash. He could have been seriously injured. What's wrong with you? Cars didn't have seat belts back then. She had grabbed him to steady the impact. I looked, and there was a little 6-year-old boy in the front seat. He was sobbing, had a red welt on his head. She said, come here, boy. Get in the car. I'm going to take you home and tell your mother what you did. I don't know why I got in the car. I mean, it was a different time back then, in 1960. She wasn't from our neighborhood, but I felt so ashamed and sorry. I got in the car. And as we were driving, I was giving her directions on how to get to my house. And as we got close to the house, she says, what do you think your mother's going to say? I said, I don't know if she'll say anything. She's sick. The woman said, sick? Your mother's sick? Yeah, she has cancer. I don't think she's going to make it. I don't know if she'll be awake. As we stopped in front of my house, the woman looked at me and said, well, I think you've learned your lesson. I'm not going to go in and bother your mother. It looked like she was about to cry. Her eyes were watering. I said, well, thank you. I have learned my lesson. She said, don't you throw a ball again at a car. And as I got out of the car, I began to cry. And I cried really hard because I hadn't cried in 2 years. And here, for some reason, I was all upset. Maybe I was afraid of what she was going to do, or what my father was going to do, or what was going to happen. But that didn't happen. 2 weeks later, my mother died. I was in the backyard playing. I was throwing rocks at a can, and my father came out and he hugged me. He said, well, she's gone. She wanted to die at home. But something else died when she died. Something in our house, something changed. My father changed, I changed, my younger sister changed. Our house was no longer a place of laughter and fun. It was dark and cold, and we stopped celebrating holidays, and we just sort of went on in a fog. Well, eventually my sister married and moved off, and I went off to college. And my father remarried, sold the house. It's still standing, the house that he built. And sometimes I go by there, I've driven by. I don't know who lives there now. I know that you can't go back, because when a house doesn't have the people in it who love each other, it's not a house, it's just a building.
Thank you, Mr. Walt Belcher in the Sunshine State. And this is why no one hires me to sing. Nobody hires me to sing. Thanks, Walt.
Thanks.
I am not going to be anal about time, I promise, but I have to say, I do, given that we have 9 or 10 storytellers in, I do appreciate you guys keeping it tight. It's very hard to do. Big stories, hard stories, mental health stuff. It's hard. Much easier to go 15 minutes. Somebody, remember there was a, well, you might know this because you do a lot of writing stuff, literary stuff. If I had more time, I'd write you a shorter letter. Who said that? You know?
Oh, I don't know who said that, but it's great.
Yeah, it's the same type of thing with story, right?
Yeah.
Anybody could tell a 14-minute story. Try to put it in 5 or 7 minutes. Now that's the challenge. Some of you know we even do 99-second stories. Now that is just. And our Grand Slam champion is here, by the way. She's laying low, but our most recent Grand Slam champion is in the audience. She will reveal herself later, I'm sure. We are moving back to California. We're going all over the map. I think we're actually going international this evening, which I love. Mr. Emerson is his first name. I think his last name is D. Yep. That's a great name. Emerson Dameron.
I had nothing to do with it, but I'll take the compliment.
That's a famous person's name.
It's maybe the night is young.
You never know what's going to happen in the next 45 minutes. All right.
I do not.
Have some fun.
I'm Emerson Dameron, and I'm almost divorced. I'm told that it's going to be final on August 21st by the Los Angeles court, which at this point, I'll believe it when it happens. It's been a long, strange trip. Basically, I married Alyssa, who was my drinking buddy, and then I had to stop drinking for serious medical reasons. And she continued drinking, and things got very weird. And I stuck around for as long as I could until I couldn't stand it anymore. And then I stuck around for another 6 months, and then I left. And the process of leaving was streamlined by the long distance relationship that I was having with Phoebe, who was a very old friend of mine. And it was always one of those right person, wrong time kind of situations. We were dating other people or married to other people or living on opposite sides of the country. And the time was just never opportune. But she reached out to me and made it clear that she was very interested. And we developed an intense sexting relationship. Phoebe is amazing. She's absolutely brilliant. She's an artist. She has worked on movies and TV, stuff that you've seen, and her contributions have been the best thing about them. She's beautiful and sexy and has a dirty smile and is intense and has a big heart and big emotions, and we fell pretty hard for each other. So after I moved out, I decided to give myself a treat. I flew back east for a few days, and Phoebe and I shacked up at a motel in her city. And the first night alone was absolutely worth it. It was more than I could have possibly hoped for. When we kissed, it was like our tongues are doing ballet. And after we did the post-sex debrief and agreed that this had been one of our off nights. We were nervous and jittery, and it was going to be so much better on the subsequent night. The next night we went out for dinner with Phoebe's friends, who were also artists and freaks and weirdos. And I felt so free and accepted, and like I'd found the place where I fit in. And I knew that things were going to get better. Nothing was going to stop them from getting better. And in the middle of dinner, the text messages started rolling in. When I left the apartment that I shared with Alyssa, my wife, I left kind of all of a sudden because I didn't know how she was going to react. And we didn't take a lot of time to divvy up the possessions, but I took the car because I had made all the payments on it. I did all the maintenance. It was essentially my car. And she kept the cat. The cat's name is Drill. He's very much Alyssa's cat, but I love him. How could you not? He has cerebral hyperplasia, which is a cognitive disability that gives him this adorable stumbling drunkard's walk. But he's very resilient and tenacious, does not know that he's special. The cat's not going to cure cancer anytime soon, but he's a wonderful cat. And I took very good care of the car. Meanwhile, Alyssa fed the cat tuna out of the can, which is people food. And she started frantically texting me that the cat was sick and apparently had a urinary tract infection. She said, "You have to drive the car to Hollywood and take the cat to the hospital now." And I had the reaction that I always get when Alyssa is lashing out at me, which is a freeze reaction. I get stunned, my throat constricts, my eyes get wide, my heart speeds up, I stammer like a dope, and there's nothing I can do. And I didn't know what to do this time. I could just feel myself having a panic attack right in the middle of this restaurant with these people that I really liked. I don't like to throw around the word abuse. I feel like I'm getting sick to my stomach just saying it, but I was diagnosed with complex PTSD by a psychologist as a result of being married to Alyssa. And Alyssa herself told me that that's what she was doing. One night when she was blackout drunk and screaming at me and threatening me and tearing into me, she stopped momentarily and said, "I know this is emotional abuse," and then just got right back into it and kept going until she passed out, and then woke up the next morning with no hangover, no memory of anything that happened, started over with a clean slate. So, would that everything in life was presented with that kind of clarity. I should probably trust her when she tells me exactly what she's doing. And that's probably why I stayed through all of the temper tantrums and all of the cheating. And I stayed after I found out she was trying to fuck our marriage counselor. And it took me forever to get out. And she picked the one thing that was my most vulnerable spot. I love Drill the cat. I would do anything for the cat that I could, but the car is in a parking deck in Inglewood and I'm on the other side of the country. And I don't want to get into why I'm on the other side of the country. So I just do one of the hardest things I'd ever done, which is I say, no, I can't do this. I won't do this. I'm not able to do this. You can take the cat in an Uber and I'll pay for it, but I can't drive to Hollywood. You're going to have to figure this out on your own. She was not happy. She lashed out at me, which didn't feel good, but it was easier to deal with being on the other side of the country. We grabbed the check and Phoebe and I go back to the hotel and we start kissing. She takes off her clothes and she's wearing sexy lingerie and she gives me a rope to tie her up with so I can ravish her. And if she'd handed me a check for $1 million on top of that, it wouldn't have made any difference. I'd already felt like I won the lottery. This was my dream come true. And I realized that I was not going to be able to perform because I was still having a panic attack. I was up for about 3 more hours. She put her arms around me and fell asleep, and was very understanding, but I think that broke the trust that we had. She had made herself really exquisitely vulnerable to me, and I was not ready to meet her there because I was still hurting from the marriage. So our relationship kind of ended after that, which finally broke my heart and crushed it. And now I don't believe in love anymore, which is kind of a relief. So that's good. You can't hurry grief. I tried to fast track it, and it all fell apart when my ex-wife accidentally poisoned her cat. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. the now famous Emerson Dameron. Man, Emerson. You know, I've got to say, usually when someone tells a story, there's something I say about it. I'm careful about what I say because, you know, they're not really telling it to get commented upon, but I try to find something that I can say. Perhaps it's some overlap with my life. I think I'm going to let that one just sit right where it is.
Let it percolate.
I'm going to let that baby just. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Good seeing you. It's been a while.
Yeah, good to see you too, man.
And I'm glad you're getting some action. All right. That's all I'll say. I'm happy for you in that respect. Other than that, just a little envy, but the whole story. Thank you for the story. I'm just being silly. Thank you for your story. All right. Next up is our 5th storyteller. Big announcement. We're going across the border now. We are going north of the border. We're going to Quebec. It's my favorite province in Canada, but again, I don't think people care so much about what my favorite province is. Madeleine, Holden, we've known each other for well over a year now. You continue to tell stories. It's so interesting how I met so many of you, so I'm glad you're here. I'm going to stop talking, and you are going to tell your story. Have some fun.
Okay, thank you. You know that song, Summertime? When the living's supposed to be easy? Well, I wonder how my summer got so complicated. A couple of years ago, my son Simon announced that he was going to marry his girlfriend Erica from France and live happily ever after in Montreal. Then they asked me to tell a few stories right in the wedding ceremony. And I said, oh, of course, I'd be happy to. COVID hit. This event has been postponed twice, but it looks like it might actually happen on Saturday. In July, I started thinking about what I'm going to say. They were so vague about the instructions. 10 to 15 minutes. Say what you want. We love your stories, Madeleine. So, sounds easy, right? How complicated can it be? Yeah, well, it might be a little complicated. You see, my son, Simon, yeah, he's not really my son. And his identical twin brother, Sam, he isn't either. I've raised them since they were 3, and I love them with all my heart. But there's a biological mother who resurfaces once every year or two to make it completely clear whose blood is flowing in their veins. I think back to when I first met them. I was 23 years old, and it was like everything was happening all at the same time. I was just getting out of rehab after a really serious car accident, and I was moving into this cool little adapted apartment on Guy Street in Montreal. I got accepted at McGill in social work, and they were doing all these renovations so I could be a student there. And then there was this guy, the twins' dad, who was saying he loved me and he wanted to spend the rest of his life with me. I didn't really believe it because who would pick somebody in a wheelchair, right? Oh, I talk about complicated. At first, it was just fun and a little exciting. It was like being whisked up into a hurricane. There was a court case for the custody of these little kids, and there was some nasty human behavior, straight out of that movie, Kramer versus Kramer. But I'm studying human behavior, so it's sort of my thing. And I'm kind of morbidly curious. You know, when you look at something and you know you shouldn't be looking, but you try and draw your eyes away, but you just can't because you want to know the end of the story. It was like that. Then I fell in love with the three of them, and everything got complicated and really personal. It was like I was being cast in this role in some bad movie, and I was expected to play the wicked stepmother. I was accused of stealing another woman's children because it was assumed I couldn't have any of my own because I was in a wheelchair. Yeah, it might get a little complicated because those people are going to be at the wedding. I get inspired and I write the story in a day. And for the next couple of days, I move things around and I tweak it a little bit. And then I read it out loud. I practice it out loud, saying it to my cat, Lucky, outside on my side balcony in the hot July sun. And then it gets really good. I really like it. It sounds nice. And just at this time, this is when I would normally take it to a workshop and run it by the pros to see how it lands. But I can't do that because this story's in French and I don't have a workshop in French yet. So I decide I'm just going to tell it like it is and see what happens at the wedding. Life happens. My sister Barb flies into Quebec, and there's all this legal business that needs to get done before my mom dies. And my mom, she really isn't doing very well. And it's just so depressing to hear her talking about her funeral all the time. Like she needs to control the story right till her last breath. And then my oldest daughter, Rachel, moves back home, complete with all her furniture and drama, a case of COVID, and a neurotic cat. It's just so much. And then I realize I haven't thought about this story for weeks, and the clock is ticking, and I have to get my act together. The other night, we're outside after supper in my backyard, sitting around a bonfire, as we tend to do, enjoying a glass of wine, listening to some music, telling some stories. And at the end of the evening, people start drifting off home to bed. And then it's just the three of us. My husband, Jean-Pierre's on my right, and my sister, Barb's on my left. And I say, hey, listen up. I'll tell you what I'm going to say at the wedding. And then I tell my friend's story in the dark. When I'm done, Jean-Pierre stands up and he says, you're going to have to cut half of that. And he marches into the house, slams the door like he's really mad. And I look over at my sister Barb, and she has this mortified look on her face, and she says, are you out of your fucking mind? You can't say that at a wedding. My heart sinks. I really like this story. All the layers of of meaning and the little intricacies, the little details. I even threw in some dark sarcasm just for fun. So I defended. I said, Barb, why would they ask a storyteller to tell stories right in the middle of a wedding ceremony if I can't tell the truth? Yeah, Barb says, no, it's a wedding. Look, why don't you take some of this stuff to like that Happyish hour thing that you do? Like those storytellers, they seem to really like the truth. They seem to get your brand of weird. I sulk into my chair. I look into the fire, into the dying embers of this fire. I think of my grandmother, who always said, keep a stiff upper lip. And my mom, who still says, chin up, show them who's in charge. Yeah, two really strong women. And they've influenced me a lot more than I care to admit. They could take, both of them, the tiniest little detail in a story and spin it in such a way that they would smooth over everything. They would polish up those rough edges so that the story always sounded a lot nicer than the truth, lying by omission. I'm just so tired of pretending. I rewrote the story, of course. It's a wedding after all. I left out all the wicked stepmother part and how hurt I was by prejudices directed at me by people who didn't even know me and still don't. I left all the part about the fairy tales that I think are really stupid. And they give little boys and girls antiquated roles to fill. And they grow up with these unrealistic expectations about the future. I leave out the part that most women's first Prince Charming was probably an asshole. And I also leave out that happily ever after isn't magic. It's hard work and commitment, and sometimes a daily grind. I don't say any of that. They're going to figure it out or not. On Saturday, I'm going to dress up in my costume and my mask, meaning I'm going to put on my wedding outfit and I'm going to put on a thick layer of makeup to cover up scars from old wounds. I'm going to go up to the mic and I'm going to tell my story. I'm going to hold the audience in the palm of my paralyzed hand. I'm going to make them laugh and cry at just the right moments, like a master. It's going to be fine. I'm going to pretend that everything's fine, that I'm fine.
All right, thank you, Madeleine. Yeah, I'm fine. We're fine. You're fine, right? I'm fine. You're fine. We're fine. How you doing?
Fine.
Fine. Me too. We're fine. Everything's fine. Okay. Thank you so much. That Madeleine was our fifth storyteller. I got to say again, thank you for being here, storytellers, audience. You found this space in myriad ways. I appreciate it. Just a couple quick announcements. We've got, this is a monthly-ish event. So if you like this event and you want to come back, you're welcome to come back. Let people know about it. In the first or second Sunday of September, we're going to have a curated show where the stories are centered on suicide. We're working it out, who we're inviting, who we're working with, and what that looks like. But just so you know, that scares some people. Might not be your thing, but it sure as shit doesn't scare me. And I actually want to let you know there's two podcasts. There's one that's a grit podcast. It's story stuff, and many of you know. Also, there's something called Suicide Noted, which is conversations with suicide attempt survivors. So if that's your thing, you think you might benefit from that or learn something or just feel a little less shitty or a little less alone by hearing people talk about that kind of thing, I welcome you to listen. This is not some nefarious way of me trying to get more listeners. It is a little bit, but not a lot. Anyway, thanks for being here. Our next storyteller is Patricia. She is somewhere in, and she's not going to like me for saying this, I think she's in flyover country. Sorry. No one appreciates that. I think you can understand where I'm coming from with that, right, Patricia?
Well, I had a nationally known, really fancy storyteller come. I set up 5 paid gigs in 1 week. I was her personal driver. I took care of the airfare and hotel rooms and everything. And I explained to her that this is the country I love. And if she's had anything negative to say about it, I would see if I could change the path of our travels and drive by all 4 sides of every cornfield in Iowa. She was very quiet. Onward. Now, since we no longer have discrimination in the workplace in terms of pay or duties or anything like that, because in 1964, we passed that legislation that says there won't be any discrimination. I don't know if this story will help you now, but in 1976, I accidentally learned what the men directors were being paid and what work they had to do and compared it to mine. And then I went about establishing comparable pay for work of comparable worth. The city administrator couldn't bear to have me use equal pay for equal work, but that's okay. Comparable pay worked for me. And at one point, the city administrator pulled together a chart that he thought would just solve the whole thing. He looked at 8 libraries with similar populations, and he listed what the library director was paid in each place. And he said, Waverly is paying ours way too much. I took that chart. I looked up those statistics. Now I put down whether you had to have a graduate degree, how large your library was, how many hours a week it was open, how much staff you had, what your circulation was. I put all those things in, and then I went a little further. I looked up the city administrator and I said, will you look at that? There are 3 communities that don't even have one. And then I looked up the fire department. I said, think about this. 6 of these communities only have volunteers. No one is paid. And look at this. In one of these, there's no police department at all. They use the county sheriff. Will we be eliminating the firefighters, the police department, and the city administrator? That was the last we saw or heard about those comparative statistics. Sometimes you have to step up and say, hold it right there.
Ooh, okay, Patricia. Shorter story. Heck, stories don't need to be 5 minutes. You know that. I know that. You get a nice little one in a couple minutes. Thank you very much for that. You know what I'm so intrigued by, in addition to everybody's stories, which, by the way, after we're done, kind of a loose Q&A or salon, call whatever you want afterwards. So if you have a question or two, you're thinking about it, Just write it down and you have an opportunity to talk about it. I am so intrigued by where people sit. Most of you, particularly those I know, I've seen you in the same seat with the same backdrop or background for so long. And and invariably I imagine what's around you. And I know I'm not right. The odds of me being right are very small. I'd love one day to do this thing where people just take a camera and just pan a little bit. I'd love to see more about your lives. But for now, the stories are enough. Thank you, Patricia. You go by Patricia or Pat?
There's a story for that.
For another night, yes. I removed her spotlight. You don't get another slot. For now, I'm going to call you Patricia because that's what I see here.
Okay.
You know I'm joking about flyover country. I have a couple friends in Iowa, including Corey Thomas May. It is a good state with a short name. Next up is Mark. I don't think I've ever met Mark until this evening. We may have crossed paths once or twice, but I'm going to spotlight you. You're going to unmute yourself, sir. And oh, what a cool backdrop. That you win the award for coolest backdrop of the evening. Background, Mark. All right. Whenever you're ready, looking forward to hearing your story.
Thank you. Several years ago, I was a mental health therapist. I ran a outpatient group for substance abuse folks, people who were drinking or drugging. And I had a couple of guys in the group. This was an outpatient group, so people just came every day and then left and went back home. And there were a couple of guys in the group who were friends with each other. And every day they came into the group, they would whine. They were whiners. They would whine about, there's nothing to do in this town. We can't have any fun without drugs or without alcohol. And they couldn't find any work, and they would just whine and whine. And one day I got really pissed at them, and I said, listen, you guys, I'll tell you what, I go out to Squaw Peak, which was a small mountain that's here in Phoenix. I said, I go out to Squaw Peak and I hike the trail on Squaw Peak 2-3 times a week. You guys come out there, you meet me in the morning, early in the morning, and you hike Squaw Peak with me, and then you tell me there's nothing to do in this town. And so they said, okay, well, we'll meet you tomorrow. We'll meet you tomorrow out at Squaw Peak. So I told them 5:30, meet me there early in the morning. So I got out there 5:30 in the morning with my water bottles and my hiking boots. And I parked in the parking lot. And of course, neither of these guys is anywhere to be found. So I wait a couple of minutes. They're not there. I figure, okay, they're not taking the challenge. So I go up and I start hiking up Squaw Peak. Now I was hiking Squaw Peak about 2-3 times a week at that time. So it's about 1,000 feet from the base of Squaw Peak to the top. And it took me about 30-40 minutes to do that every day. Now there were different parts of the mountain that were more difficult, less difficult. About 3/4 of the way up, there was a cement bench where people could sit. And it was a place where you could rest. And then after that, the mountain started to get a little more difficult. There were steps going up, and then there was a pipe that actually the city had installed, like a handrail where you could pull yourself up the steeper part. And there was a place that was very narrow, where it was so narrow that you had to sort of step aside and put your back against the wall of the mountain while other people passed going the other way while you went up and they went down. And then there was a flat kind of a part. Now, finally, the last part was in a crevice where there were handholds going up, I'd say about 15 feet up the mountain. And you grabbed up, pulled yourself up, and then you were at the top of the mountain. Well, I had gone up the whole way. I got up into that crevice, and I had started to reach up those handholds, And I started to look up, and there were these two guys looking down at me from the top of the mountain and laughing their heads off. Hey, hey, Goldman, where have you been? We've been waiting for you. And I laughed myself too. They reached their hand out, helped pull me up to the top of the mountain, and we had a good laugh about the whole thing. Well, it was pretty funny. And of course, that day in group, they were all saying, hey, we got up there before Goldman did. You know, we got up there. Well, it was pretty funny. Well, several weeks later, these guys were through with group and they kind of left, and I never saw them again. And of course, well, especially when you're doing outpatient groups, you never know when you're going to see people, when you're going to not. And I never did. Well, a few weeks after that, things got worse in the hospital. Money got tighter. And within a couple of months, they fired me. I lost my job because money was too tight. And at the same time, I had a buddy who was also a therapist. He lost his job. Well, things got worse and worse all around town. And one day, my buddy and I are sitting having lunch, and we're sort of commiserating, thinking about how bad things are in the town because there are no places to work and they can't pay enough money, and there's no place to work and nothing to do. And all of a sudden I found myself whining just like these two guys had been. And I thought, oh my God, I'm whining just like these two guys were. And I decided I needed to do something. I needed to challenge myself so that I wasn't sitting around and whining. So I decided I would get out and hike Squaw Peak because it had been some time since I had been hiking Squaw Peak. So I got my boots out and I got my water bottles out, and I decided I would get out and hike Squaw Peak. So I drove to the parking lot and I started up the first switchbacks going back and forth. Well, it had been a while since I'd been hiking, and it was tough. It was difficult. I could hardly make it up the first two switchbacks, so much that I couldn't breathe and my knees were just killing me. So that was it. I went down, I went home. And I vowed that I would get as farther than I could each day, a little farther, a little farther. So the second day I got up, I went a little farther. Third day, went a little farther. And finally, it was by the fourth day, I had gotten up to that place about 3/4 of the way, and I had sat on that concrete bench and rested, and then went back down. Finally, I decided on the fifth day, on Friday, I'd go the rest of the distance and I'd make it all the way. And that's what happened. On the fifth day, I pushed myself and I pushed myself. And I got up to that place where the pipes and the railings were, and I got up to the narrow spot, and I finally get up to that crevice, pulled myself up by the handholds and pulled myself up, and oh, I was breathing hard, but I made it to the top. Now I'm standing up there, and it happened that I was the only one up there on the top of Squaw Peak. And I looked around, and you could see 360 degrees up on top of the mountain. And I looked over and I saw there was a guy coming up, a fellow who came up, pulled himself up, got up to the top, and he glanced at me and I glanced at him, and we gave each other that requisite nod of the head, like, hi, how you doing? You made it. That's good. And next thing I know, he keeps walking straight toward me, walking right towards me. And he looks me right in the eye, and he puts his hand out to grab my hand, and he says, you probably don't remember me. And I didn't know who he was. He said, I was one of those guys that you challenged years ago to hike Squaw Peak. And ever since that time, I've been hiking it 2-3 times a week. And I've been clean and sober ever since. And you saved my life. And he turned around and he headed back down, and he left me sort of dumbfounded. And I thought, Well, I didn't know what to say. And if I had had my wits about me, I would have said something to him. I would have said, I didn't save your life. You saved your own life. I just kind of opened the door to which way to go. And as I walked down the mountain, I realized that's true. He had saved his own life. And on that day, because I had decided to take my own challenge and challenge myself on Squaw Peak, that I had, in a sense, saved my own life. And we had both saved our own lives that day on Squaw Peak.
Thank you, Mr. Mark Goldman. People just call you Goldman. Hey, Goldman.
Sure.
That's the kind of last name that people would say, right? Goldman. I'm just wondering. That background behind you is virtual?
Yes,
Or are you
it is.
actually in front of a brick wall with cool graffiti type stuff?
No, it's virtual. It hides my messy kitchen.
Okay. It's kind of cool. Thanks for being here. Are you in where are you? In Arizona?
Phoenix, Arizona.
Oh, okay. It's hot out there, I bet, eh?
103 degrees today.
Isn't it annoying when people say, but it's dry? It's still hot, yeah?
It's very hot.
Thank you for being here and telling that story. I appreciate it very much. We have two more storytellers, I believe. I'm glad that they're not new storytellers for sure, but they're just new to me in my own delusional, self-centered world. That's what matters. So I'm glad Mark, our paths crossed, and Colin, we've connected a couple of times. I've seen you on a couple of stages. I'm going to spotlight you, Colin. And first of all, I hope I'm saying your name right, because it would suck if
Yeah.
not.
There you go.
Because there's a famous sportscaster. I think he goes by Colin. No, probably not. That's Colin. It's Colin Cowherd. I'm wrong.
You had it right the first time.
Nobody spells it that way and says colon. That wouldn't be probably a choice. All right, anyway, bro, let me stop talking and looking forward to hearing your story.
Yeah. Okay. Hello. Nice to meet everybody. So let's see. I went to, believe it or not, I went to a college that when I feel when I try to describe it to people, I say I went to essentially the school from the movie Footloose, except it was 20 years after that story. What I mean by that is you were not legally allowed to drink or to dance in the town that I went to college in. In fact, when this was a big deal to me. I was a very religious person. I wanted to be at this school. I was not sent here against my will. But I actually signed a pledge willingly saying I would not smoke, drink, swear, have sex, or dance while I was at school. Dance being the most unforgivable of the sins, I think. And I was the kind of person who I grew up very religious. I wanted to follow the rules. I wanted to be good. I would follow any rule you gave me. And so I go to this school and it's very expensive. So I go and I get a work study job, and my job is in the computer lab of the school library. The computer lab is like back behind the reference books. I work Saturday morning. It's a ghost town. There's no one there. I'm usually doing my work alone, which is like installing software for staff. And also I'm running Napster. So if you're not familiar, Napster was like, well, the prototypical downloading, pirating music. And it was awesome because you just click anything and add it to your queue. And so you could, music. And I was doing some very out there mixtures of music, right? As an 18-year-old sheltered church kid, I was mixing Jars of Clay and then following it with Rage Against the Machine, which I'm told you cannot do that. It's not physically possible. Your brain will explode. But I did it and I was proud of it. And I'm sitting there downloading music and it was fun. You could download videos, funny movie GIFs and sound bites. And this video pops up and it's called Jenna on the Boat XXX. And without even thinking, I just click add to queue. And I download it and I click on it, and you might have some idea where this is going. It is hardcore pornography. I mean, it is like, it's grainy. They seem like they're mad at each other. No one is driving the boat. You know, it's it's very alarming. And just so you know, I have not, oh, I should add this. So I quickly downloaded Jenna in a lot of other locations just for research purposes. So just so you know this about me, I had almost no sex education growing up. I was taken out of the class by my religious mother. I had never seen boobs in real life at this point. I mean, that's probably pretty obvious. Let's see, what else? I spent all the time in youth group, which I now understand, looking back on it, is like a well-disguised abstinence program for young Christian teenagers. And also, I think the most daring thing is I went and I grabbed the bra section of a JCPenney catalog and I hid it under my bed. And my mom found me and yelled at me about it. So now I'm in this moment in this computer lab, and I'm making up for lost time. I mean, I have gone right to the dark side, so to speak. And my whole body is just excited about this. Like, from the bottom of my feet to my head is light. I am, all I could think is I want to be with Jenna. There's no polite way to explain this, but then something happened that, as a person with no sex ed background, I did not know could happen. And then I had to solve the problem of how to get to my dorm room from the middle of campus. And I did a walk of shame, but a virgin's walk of shame, which is, it's a unique version. And I go to back to my dorm, and I deleted all the files, and I'm 18. I don't know how to do laundry, so I probably just threw my pants away. And I changed, took a shower, changed, and I went directly to the prayer chapel in the center of my college. It was this dimly lit room with this little cross with a light shining behind it, and I was alone there, and I stayed there for hours, and I cried, I prayed for forgiveness, I journaled in this journal that was there, just all of these feelings of shame. And I never told anyone about this what had happened. I swept it under the rug. I swept it under the rug and directly into my nervous system. I learned later that this is called religious trauma syndrome. And it doesn't happen to everybody. But if it happened to you, like it happened to me, it might have been because of these circumstances. You take a young person, you immerse them in a way of thinking that tells them that at their core, they are fundamentally bad. You teach them that every feeling of shame they have is normal. You encourage them to feel fearful and untrusting and alone. And you teach them to go to war with their own body. That's how you create religious trauma syndrome. I'm happy to report years later that I have undone so much of the damage that I experienced in the early part of my life. And I decided I would tell you this story because this is a moment, me, this young man in this computer lab, I've never told anybody this. But I'm telling you because what I've discovered on the other side of all this is I'm actually a very brave person. Because I know you weren't there, and I know your journey is different, but I also have a feeling you can relate on some level. It's just my story. It's even, to me, it's a little bit funny when I look back on it now. And I guess I would share something I learned, and this is very profound. You can watch a Jenna Jameson video and you can still get married. You can still have a great relationship. I'll also tell you that I learned that shame cannot ever be strong enough to kill you. And beware anybody who tells you different. And if you're not sure if you're going to be able to pick them out, here's a tell. They might tell you you're not allowed to dance. That's my story.
It's Colin. Oh, the callback, the king of callbacks. His name is Colin. You're in North Carolina too, right?
I am, yeah.
Are you still in Durham? Durham, right?
Yeah, I'm in Durham. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for letting me tell my story.
I'm very happy you're here, man. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. We've had like stories that are kind of all really interesting, and I guess mental health is a broad enough term, which is what I want, that we've had these different kinds of stories and sort of topics or subjects under it, which I find fascinating, interesting, and I appreciate you all. And I believe our final, I'm not sure about Nestor. Nestor's a maybe. You can give me a thumbs up or chat me if you want to tell after our next teller, Nestor, is Isaac, which actually Isaac is new to this space too, which is cool. And I love, Isaac, that you are like me and you don't give a shit. You're like, I'm going to lay on my bed. And if you have a problem with that, I don't care. People judge me all the time. They're like, Sean, why do you shave your head? I'm like, it's none of your business. Sean, why don't you wear sleeves? Leave me alone. Do you feel me, Isaac? Okay, Isaac's like, shut the fuck up, Sean. All right, let me spotlight you. And I am really looking forward to your story. And I'm going to, on your behalf, based on what you shared earlier, let people know that this might trigger you, right? Fair?
Yeah.
Do you want to add any more to that, or is that enough?
I just hope the story will help people going through, what I go through.
Awesome. Whenever you're ready.
All right. Hey guys, I'm Isaac Woolsey. I'm also from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I wasn't originally from North Carolina. I moved all over the place, but I was born in Miami Beach, Florida on August 10th, 1993 at Mount Sinai Medical Center in Miami Beach, Florida. But I was growing up, like when I was 3 years old, I was diagnosed with high functioning autism. And I remember at one point I lost my ability to speak, and I had to go through a lot just to be able to talk. And I just remember, like, I thought there was something wrong with me, but I didn't know about autism at the time, and I didn't know what was wrong. And I would always see my parents crying. Just and I thought I was doing something. I was messing up their marriage. They're still married, but I thought I was hurting them. And I thought I was a bad kid, and I didn't know how to get better. And I remember I was pulled out of my kindergarten class and had to retake it, even though I did graduate from kindergarten, but I didn't really know anything. And I remember my parents started riding me by making me do homeschooling. And, I thank them because they're the reason I can talk. I remember it would just be so hard. I would be crying over an ABC thing, a little book on ABCs. And I remember I couldn't draw because of my wrist. And it would be hard for me to draw. And in fact, I still can't really draw other than a stick figure. And whenever I write, you can't read it. And I remember that would always mess with me. Like, I wish I could draw. Like, I remember one time I saw like on TV they were doing something about the Looney Tunes where they were showing how to animate, and I was trying to draw all these different pictures of Bugs Bunny, and they didn't move, and I remember crying because of that. And and I remember what my parents would do if I wasn't studying right in school. They would like they would drive me to a specialized institutional school. They wouldn't take me inside or anything. They drive right outside of it, and they say, if you don't study, if you don't behave, if you don't do well, you're going to end up there. You're going to end up in, as they would say, retard school. And I remember it really hurt me as a kid. And I remember like literally like children in the playground would call me a retard, even though, and so I had to work really hard to get really smart. And I remember I was homeschooled until I hit 11th grade, and I had to go to a private school. I remember in private school I was getting A's and B's, but I had this one teacher who would always pick on me because she couldn't read my writing, which was a sore spot for me. And I was like, what's wrong? Why can't you read my writing? I mean, I try to make it clear. In fact, one time what she did, this teacher, the science teacher, she got the assignment that I did, which was like a formula worksheet, and she just gave me a big fat 0 on it, and she said I couldn't read it, so I'm just giving you a 0. And I said, well, why couldn't you ask me what it meant to translate it? And so what she did was she passed around the assignment to everyone in class so they could laugh at it. And I remember I got really mad about that. And another issue was she called me into her office because I think I messed up her desk or something by taping it. And she was like, I just wanted to ask you something. Are you Asperger's? Which I later learned about being autistic later on in life when I was a teenager, but I wanted to keep it secret because I was afraid I'd be sent to another specialized school. And I was like, and I lied and I said, no, I'm not. I'm not a retard. I'm not a retard. And she's like, I know you get A's and B's, but we can't read your writing. But you're and so eventually I did graduate from the school, and I remember ever since then, like whenever I hear someone say a retard or use that slur, I get really, really mad. Even though I have used it in my stand-up comedy as in a context thing, I still feel dirty saying it. Like honestly, it's just the messed up thing. And I remember my brother, who was jealous of me, used to hit me over the head and call me a damn retard and said that I'm nothing. And I remember I got really mad about it. So, but now I'm better. I went to college. I didn't graduate because I dropped out. But I did was on the honor roll, and I was on the dean's list. And I now have a job. And I also do stand-up comedy. So I'm not stupid. In conclusion, I'm autistic. I'm not a retard. Thank you.
God damn, Isaac, you are the man. If any of you are wondering, as a host, I have this unfortunate situation to be in sometimes. of timing things just to make sure that there's some sort of, structure to the whole evening. Isaac, I asked you to be 7 minutes or less. You were like 6:55. It was the perfect story.
Yep.
I really appreciate you. I really appreciate your honesty. And I'm glad to have met you, man. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's really cool. I want to check out your stand-up comedy sometimes. Where do you perform?
I perform around Chapel Hill in Durham. I have a YouTube channel called Isaac Woolsey, the Autistic Comedian.
That's
That has
amazing.
some of my stand up on there. And I also wrote 2 children's books.
Wow. All right. I got a lot of questions. All right. So here's what we're going to do. I don't want to put anybody on the spot. If there's anybody else who would like to tell a story, because sometimes people get inspired, I want to give you the option to do that now. I'll wait a couple moments, a couple beats, so to speak. Would love to hear your stuff. Let me know. And then, all right, cool. Got one more. One more story. And then after our final storyteller, Nestor Gomez. I hope you can stay. I know that for some of you, it's getting late. But I would love to, if you could stick around and talk a little bit, because some people might be curious, or you might be curious based on what's come up. So I want to invite you to do that. Nestor, hang on one sec. Nestor, where are you, sir? Where did you go? I had you and now you're gone. There you are. Sorry. Let me spotlight Nestor and stop recording